Welcome to Scotty B's Fitness Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Blomberg. My goal with this podcast is to inform and inspire others to start and continue their fitness journeys by sharing my story. Episode 7, Part 2 of 2 on the right macros and intermittent fasting. In this episode, I talk about what I've learned about macronutrients or macros and how intermittent fasting is essential to my weight loss. Again, I started my fitness journey back in July of 2021. I work out 6 days a week. I've improved my diet and incorporated intermittent fasting into my routine. Lost over 90 pounds with the goal of getting down to 250 pounds, which will be another 55 more for me. My other goal is to be able to do pull ups when I get to 250 pounds. I'm working towards that as well. I'm not an expert, I'm just a guy sharing my story to hopefully inspire others. Episode 7. This is a follow up from my previous episode. So, 6, I talked about kind of a what not to do in terms of the old food pyramid and in terms of the fallacy around calorie deficit losing. So now in this one, I'm going to talk about the right way to do it. As I mentioned, as I always do in my intro, I'm not the expert. So where have I gotten my advice from? Well, my most trusted source is Dr. Jason Fung. He's written a number of books. The ones that I've read are Obesity Code and Life in the Fasting Lane. I recommend either one of those. I'm reading the book Complete Guide to Fasting, also a Jason Fung book, which appears to be more of a reference novel. So one I might refer to, can kind of go back and forth in it. He's got another book that's focused on diabetes called The Diabetes Code. Um, and that's gotten rave reviews as well. Um, One of the reasons that I like Fung as a resource is that, for one thing, if I read his books and his advice, it kind of parallels what's worked for me. So I believe in it from firsthand experience. The second reason I like Fung is his books are very well referenced. It isn't just his opinion that he's spouting. He's actually, within the books, he talks about what his sources are, what research he's looked at, what papers he's reviewed. And for instance, I've noticed that he often uses graphics and references a NIH researcher by the name of Kevin Hall. Um, Another book that I've read that by Jorge Cruz is called The Cruise Control Diet. This book I was turned on to that because Dr. Fung wrote the foreword to that book. And Cruise Control Diet is, I've liked that one to guide me on my intermittent fasting because it's more about what to eat when you're eating and not just about, fasting. All right, I'm going to start this off by talking about, well, what is the right solution for macros, or has been the right solution for me for macros? I mentioned in the last podcast that the old food pyramid had recommended that carbs be uh, like 55 to 75% of calories, or something really crazy high. For me, my target is right around 25% of my calories to be carbohydrates, 25% or even less sometimes. That said, there are such a thing as good carbs and bad carbs. So the good carbs for me are from fruits. The bad carbohydrates are from processed foods such as breakfast cereal. And I avoid altogether what many refer to as empty carbs, which is soda pop and beer, basically, you know, added sugar to beverages. Um, Protein for me is a significant part of my diet. I target right now right around 35% or maybe even higher some days. And then, of course, the rest is our fats. But just like with carbs, there are good and bad fats. We do almost all of our cooking with olive oil or avocado oils. I've done some cooking with coconut oil. It's a little bit harder to work with because it's a solid at room temperature. Uh, we avoid almost entirely canola oil or vegetable oils. Um, as far as good fats, too, the cheese and avocados are great. Um, and then fats with protein. So fats in meat are also okay. But I do feel like I should have them in moderation. So I don't have fatty meals like ribs or ribeye every day. So some days I'm eating lean meats. So that's the macros as I view them, as I've been targeting them. Now I'm going to start talking about intermittent fasting. So 3 years ago in 2021, I did not know any of these things about nutrition and fasting. And that said, as it turns out, I was practicing what I call accidental intermittent fasting. Lazily, I was in the habit of just skipping breakfast. And by skipping breakfast, I mean just having a cup of coffee in the morning and calling it good. Um, when I started to work out, doing my daily workouts in July of 2021, um, to that routine, I was simply adding about 1,000 calorie burn every morning, and actually, it started my weight loss, and I lost my first 50 pounds that way without thinking at all about what I'm eating, except just disciplining myself not to change my diet at that time. And so, lost the 50 pounds, and then I plateaued, and and then I decided I better learn something about my about nutrition and see if I can get off of this plateau. And that's when this journey started, which ended up being what I've learned now from intermittent fasting. Um, at the time, I considered doing GLP-1s or other drugs. In fact, I even got my doctor to write me a prescription. It was not covered by insurance for me, which meant it was very expensive. It was like 900 bucks a month, and they're very hard to get a hold of. So I decided to see if I could go down this journey without resorting to the GLP-1s. I actually don't know much about them and how they work. I do know they've helped out a lot of people, and so I have nothing uh, ill to say about those drugs or people that use them. But I've chosen a different path and tried to just, as I mentioned, the exercise, of course, but then in terms of the nutrition and now the intermittent fasting. So, in terms of intermittent fasting, um, what is it? Well, essentially, it is taking a period of time, intentionally not eating, only drinking calorie-free drinks, which would be water, of course, number one, coffee, tea. Some people drink bone broth or other broths that are no calories in them. And basically, if you don't eat calories for a period of time, your body will eventually run out of um, readily available energy it gets from those foods that are eaten. And then the body switches over and starts to look for other sources of energy. And as long as one has fat, then the fat becomes that source of energy. And that's the gist of intermittent fasting. I know there's a lot more physiology to it. I'm not an expert enough to explain that, but that's how I look at it. Um, Getting started is tough for a lot of people, for myself included, um, because initially when your body when you're fasting, of course, your stomach is emptying, and you will feel hungry. Um, but I can tell you from experience that over time, that feeling actually goes away, and one gains more and more experience with longer and longer fasts. And some in the literature refer to this as one's fasting muscle. And so I've gone down that path. I'll talk a little bit about the different fasting schedules, but I've been able to fast for longer and longer periods of time and tolerated it quite well now that I kind of know what I'm doing. So for me, I kind of put the fasts into two distinct categories. One are the fasts that can fit into my daily schedule, and or two are the longer fasts that require more planning. So in terms of the daily fasts, um, the reason I can pull them off daily is because my evening meal is the meal where I share it with my family. It's kind of our social meal. I like to do the cooking. That's a big part of my routine. And so skipping that meal for fasting is a little bit more difficult in my routine. So what are the daily fast schedules? Well, um, I started out, like I said, doing my accidental fasting. I was actually doing what's called 16/8 fasting, which means fasting for 16 hours and then eating for 8 hours every single day. I've also done 18/6, obviously, fasting for 18 hours, eating during a 6 hour window, and something that some people refer to as OMAD, one meal a day or 23-hour fast. Basically, for me, I've gone from like dinner to dinner fasting. That's probably the most common fasting that I do today, is doing this OMAD fasting where I'll just eat dinner and then fast for 23 hours and eat dinner the following night. Uh, I've roughly followed what's called a 5-2 schedule with that, which means doing the one meal a day, 2 days a week, and then following, either a non-fasting schedule or one of those other like 18/6 schedules, 5 days a week. Okay, so the second category of fasts are the longer fasts. And I'll admit that this is kind of new for me. I've only recently completed my very first 42-hour fast. It requires some planning for two reasons. One, as I mentioned, that the evening meal is a big meal for our family, and so I need to coordinate with them and say, hey, I'm gonna do a fast on this evening. So they need to make other plans for the meal other than having me cook the meal, because um, you know basically I'm not going to eat a meal, so I'd rather not cook the meal that evening. Um, the other reason it needs planning, and this is even more important, is with longer fasts, now it becomes really important to understand what one needs to put in their body for that longer period of time. I've found for the OMAD, I really don't need to think about what I could drink water all day and I'd be just fine. That said, the longer fast, once I go over 24 hours, and this is what I've learned in the literature, is it becomes important to start to think about what one's puts in their bodies. So what do I look at is like electrolytes. So I do electrolyte supplements along with my water when I'm doing my workouts. It's because I'm sweating out so much. I want to make sure those electrolytes go back in. That's important on the days that I'm doing the extended fasts. Um, the I mentioned the broth, so I drink broth as a meal substitute. And in that broth, it's very important that it actually has the salt, because one way that people get in trouble with longer fasts is actually their body runs out of salt. They have not enough salt in their system, and then that causes a lot of digestive issues. So, in terms of my advice to anyone thinking about longer fasts, number one, work your way up to it. Don't just say, "Hey, I'm going to fast for 72 hours." It won't work. I'm certain it won't work. um, but also, you need to be prepared. Have that broth on hand or whatever else you need. There's some salts like Himalayan um, salts that people add to like their coffee. I've done that as well. Um, and so, I would caution, don't anyone do a longer fast until you really know what you're doing, because it can screw things up. So do I do longer fasts, or why do people do longer fasts? This is a very important question, because doing the longer fasts are obviously not easy to do. And as I mentioned, you got to kind of know what you're doing, because there are some risks if done wrong. So why do it? Well, it's essentially to assure successful weight loss. Um, it forces the body, no matter what the routine is, to get into that fat burning zone, so to speak. As I mentioned, with the shorter fasts, our bodies can adapt to it. That I was on a 16/8 routine for a long time, and eventually I plateaued at that. I've plateaued on the 18/6, and I think my body is also used to this OMAD or 23-hour fast. I'm still doing it periodically, but now I'm exploring the longer fast because it assures a weight loss, and that's really, I just want to keep the momentum going. So I think fasting is really been essential for me to be successful in my weight loss journey, and will continue to be. Um, there are some keys though that I was thinking about. What are the keys to success? Well, number one, mix it up. As I mentioned, I've tried all of those schedules that I mentioned, for the 16-8, 18-6, the 23-hour fast. And as I mentioned, I've done an extended 42-hour fast. I think I just feel like it seems like our body needs to have that mix up. Um, Personally, I would rather be on exactly the same schedule every day, but it doesn't seem like that is conducive to long-term weight loss. That eventually my body will get used to whatever routine I choose. So I like to mix it up. The other big key is drinking water, staying hydrated. I target at least a gallon of water every day, and I do not include the first 28 ounces that I drink before I go to my workout because I assume I'm going to sweat that out. Um, that's another key. A third key for me is fiber supplements. Um, and I think that has to do when one is fasting, essentially your digestive system is going to run its course and not have anything in there. Well, coming off of a fast, if there's literally nothing in there, it's going to be difficult, for your body to get used to all of a sudden having food. And one way that I've found I can get past that difficulty is to take fiber supplements. And so I do that quite often when I'm fasting. Um, and then the fourth one, and this one is, it's tough because when you're fasting, you're obviously going a long time without eating, and you're hungry or you're ready to eat. And but the other key is don't overeat after the fast, especially these longer fasts. What I've found is the best way to come off of a fast is to have a mini meal, which is, essentially a meal with, let's say, a half or even a quarter of the normal calories of a full meal. So maybe a snack, you can think of it as, and then followed by the real meal like 2 or 3 hours later. That's how I come off of a fast. And I found that's the key is don't overeat. And I try to plan, and I've been doing this for a while now on any of my meals, is to plan exactly what I'm going to have, put it on my plate, and eat that and no more. So there you go. That's my experience with fasting. Thank you for listening or watching. Good luck on your own fitness journeys, and if there's any way I can help, please reach out. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.